Have you ever noticed that person who seems to have their life completely together, but the second they make a tiny mistake, like dropping a pen or tripping on a curb, they look like they've just witnessed a tragedy? Or maybe that's you. You were the gifted kid in school, the one everyone said had so much potential. But now, as an adult, you feel like a high-performance sports car that's been left out in the rain for 10 years. You're not lazy, and you haven't lost your intelligence. You're experiencing a very specific, very quiet phenomenon called gifted kid burnout. Think back to third grade. While other kids were struggling with basic multiplication, you were finishing the worksheet in 5 minutes and staring at the ceiling. Teachers loved you. Parents bragged about you. You were told you were special. But here's the psychological trap. Because everything came easy to you, you never actually learned how to work hard. You learned how to be smart, and there's a massive difference between the two. When you're labeled as gifted, your identity becomes tied to the result, not the effort. If you get an A, you're validated. If you don't have to try, you're a genius. But the second things get difficult, usually around high school or college, your brain hits a wall. Since you never developed a struggle muscle, you assume that if something is hard, it means you're no longer smart. That realization doesn't just hurt, it creates a deep, existential panic. It's like being a video game character who skipped all the low-level tutorials and went straight to the final boss. You have the high-level stats, but you don't know which buttons to press when things get messy. So, you do the only logical thing a burnt-out gifted kid does. You procrastinate. Not because you're lazy, but because you're terrified. If you wait until the last minute to do a project and it turns out bad, you can say, well, I just didn't have enough time. But if you start early, give it your all, and it's still just okay, that would mean you aren't special anymore. And that's a thought your brain literally cannot handle. This leads to what psychologists call the Perfectionism-Paralysis Loop. You have these massive, world-changing ideas in your head, but you're stuck on the couch scrolling through TikTok for 6 hours because the gap between your potential and your current reality is too painful to look at. You're a perfectionist who can't get anything started because perfect is an impossible standard. It's like refusing to play a game of cards because you're afraid you won't get a royal flush on the first hand. Real-life example? Remember that hobby you started 3 months ago? Maybe it was painting or coding or learning the guitar. You were great at it for the first week. Then it got slightly technical. You hit the first real learning curve, and instead of pushing through, you just stopped. The guitar is now a very expensive piece of wall decor. Why? Because the gifted kid inside you whispered, if we aren't a natural at this, it's not for us. But let's look at the science for a second. There's a concept called fixed versus growth mindset, popularized by Carol Dweck. Gifted kids are almost always fed a fixed mindset diet. You were told you were smart, a fixed trait, rather than being told you worked hard, a variable effort. This creates a fragile ego. When a person with a growth mindset fails, they see it as data. When a gifted kid fails, they see it as a verdict on their soul. So, how do you actually fix this? How do you stop being a former gifted kid and start being a functional human? The first step is the hardest. You have to give yourself permission to be absolute trash at something. You have to learn to embrace the cringe of being a beginner. Imagine you're learning to cook. A burnt-out gifted kid wants to make a 5-course French meal on night 1. When they burn the toast, they give up and order pizza forever. A successful adult says, today, I am going to make the most mediocre scrambled eggs in human history. And when they succeed at being mediocre, they win. You have to lower the bar so far that it's impossible not to clear it. The irony of the psyche thesis here is that your potential is actually your biggest enemy. Potential is just a debt you haven't paid yet. It's a ghost of who you could be that prevents you from seeing who you are. You've been carrying the weight of everyone's expectations since you were 7 years old. It's time to put the backpack down.
You aren't a failure because you aren't a CEO by age 25. You aren't broken because you find basic adult tasks like doing laundry or answering emails overwhelming. You are just a person who was taught that their value depends on being perfect, and you're finally realizing that perfection is a lie told to children to keep them quiet in class. Think about the most successful people you know. Are they the smartest? Usually no. They're the ones who were okay with being average for long enough to actually get good at something. They didn't have the gifted label holding them back. They were allowed to fail, so they learned how to get back up. If you're watching this and nodding along, feeling that weird mix of relief and calling out, here is your homework. Go do something today that you're definitely going to be bad at. Write a terrible poem, draw a stick figure that looks like a potato, send an email with a typo on purpose. The world doesn't need more gifted people who are too paralyzed to move. It needs more average people who are brave enough to try. Your potential isn't a cage, it's just a starting line. And the best part about being at the starting line, you don't have to be fast. You just have to move. So, to the kid who was told they could change the world, you still can, but you have to be willing to fail at it first. Stop trying to be the smartest person in the room and start being the person who stays in the room when things get hard. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that separates a former gifted kid from a successful adult is the willingness to be a clueless beginner one more time. And hey, if you spent this whole video thinking about all the unfinished projects in your closet, don't feel bad. At least you're smart enough to know exactly why you're doing it now. That's progress.